It's way less about the software and more about the ability to critically think. And that's what's going to make lawyers really good at this.
How many people applied to participate?
Yeah, 13,000.
13,000 people applied. Okay.
And mostly engineers. Actually had a career before law, and I was in Hollywood, was maxed out on a credit card. And I really shouldn't have done this at the time, but I was like, you know what, let's take a shot.
Do you think that others, who maybe don't have that kind of a background can use these tools as well?
If you explain the why of what we're doing, why we want it to look this way, why we want it to function this way, who are we doing it for, who's the audience, the product that will get outputted is so much better.
Welcome to Without Limitation. This is the podcast where we meet the people who are reshaping the legal industry. Now, earlier this year, Anthropic, the makers of Claude Code, etc., launched a global hackathon. 13,000 people applied, many of them software engineers. 500 made it to the finals, 5 were shortlisted, and there was only one winner. Well, that winner turned out to be a lawyer. Michael Brown is a personal injury lawyer from Orange County in California, and he built an app which helps to solve a really important problem related to California's housing crisis. In this discussion on the podcast today, I talked to Mike about his vibe coding process. Vibe coding, for those who don't know, is the process of building applications with natural language. And Mike, interestingly, has never written a line of code in his life. We went through Mike's process. We talked about where Mike sees this all going. Is this the end of software engineers? Are lawyers able to just build things for themselves? And how do you make sure that things you do build are secure and compliant with legal sector regulations? It was a really useful and practical discussion. Mike's a super interesting guy, and I think you'll get a lot from this. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my discussion with Michael Brown. He is the winner of the Global Hackathon, and he's also a personal injury lawyer from Orange County. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Matt, thanks so much for having me, man. Excited to be here.
Well, it's a busy time for you, Mike. We were just saying before we came on, you're going on the main stage this week at the Anthropic Dev Day. So I'm honored that you have come on the Without Limitation podcast. How's the slide prep coming along for your presentation?
Well, Claude says it looks pretty good right now, so I've been having him do it.
Perfect. You've outsourced it. That's good to hear. So much to cover. And obviously, I want to get into the story of the Anthropic hackathon, which obviously you won. And I want to hear all about that. Before we do, people will know you as the winner of the hackathon. They may not know your background. And I saw that you're actually a personal injury attorney by background. So can you just share a little bit more about how you got into law in the first place? And then we'll come on to how you got from there into vibe coding.
Yeah, so I actually had a career before law, and I was in Hollywood, and I was pretty good at visual effects. I was doing things in After Effects, Maya, Cinema 4D, and I just kind of burned out of Hollywood. It's a tough environment. And so I did what any rational burnout would do, which is go to law school. So from law school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do during it. And I kind of fell into personal injury. And I actually just ended up really liking how, it's kind of like street lawyers, everyone grinds, everyone is like very independent. And so I just really liked that area of the law, especially here in California. And so, I worked with a couple different firms for a few years out of law school. And then what happened to me was every personal injury lawyer, you hit a point where you go start your own firm. And this was right at about the time when ChatGPT came out in November 2023. And so, I was faced with the same question everyone was faced with is, do I go hire immediately to get the paralegals and the support, every lawyer needs? Or in my case, all of a sudden I was playing around with this ChatGPT thing and I'm like, hey, I think this can function as a lot of my back office support. And so I was building prompt libraries before people were saying a prompt library is a thing,
Wow, that's super interesting. And it's funny, isn't it, when we talk about ChatGPT as if it's ancient history. What is it, like three years ago or something? It's this is all so recent and things are just moving so fast. So, okay, so you were starting to implement ChatGPT and AI tools as part of your practice. And is that how you got into this world of vibe coding, of building software with natural language prompts, or did that come about some other way?
Yeah. So what happened was I started with permission. I would get clients to allow me to record their phone calls. And so that allowed me to then take those. There was this new program out called Whisper. And so I would transcribe the phone calls, and then that would go in with my prompts into ChatGPT and create like basically my firm's version of an intake form, right? And so that helped me keep me very organized. And, you have the client story became pretty raw, and I started seeing the power of that. Now, my cousin is a serial entrepreneur, and we were golfing one day, and he's like, "Hey, we should productize this." And in retrospect, you go start your law firm and you're waiting, the 6 to 9 months to get your first case. And I was maxed out on a credit card. And I really shouldn't have done this at the time, but I was like, you know what? Let's take a shot. So I opened up another credit card, and we started this company called OnBreeze. And that was essentially a note-taking phone line for lawyers based upon the premise that when someone gets in a car accident, they don't go schedule a Zoom with the lawyer. They call them, right? So we needed a way to be able to take notes on the phone. And so that was OnBreeze. We went and hired offshore coders, and they did a great job. But so the week we launched it, January 2025, I had my old firm was my first client. And so I tested it up to about 3 different people on the phone line using it with different clients. The second we got a fourth person on the phone line, the thing crashes on like day one. And so I called the people in my offshore coders. I'm like, "Hey, what's going on? How can we fix this?" And they're like, "Oh, well, you only paid for the MVP, the minimum viable product. And so you need to pay more to get this thing called a queue." I'm like, "What the heck is a queue?" And so at that point, they send like, they're like, "Yeah, basically the money you spent, you got to do that double to now to be able to scale it up." And I'm like, I'm so in the hole. I'm maxed out on my credit cards. I like savings are gone. And so there's this new program called Cursor that had just come out, which is an IDE, which I don't even know what it stands for, but it's what coders use. But it adds in a chat box on the side. And so downloaded that, and I'm like, "Hey, how hard would it be to get this thing called a queue so that I don't go bankrupt?" And 10 minutes later, I had a working queue, and the thing was working. And that was essentially, so by necessity, I had vibe coded my first little piece of code. I still don't read code or anything like that, but it was that was the start of it, and it was pretty incredible. I'm glad I did.
What a great way to get into it. And it sounds like really from a place of necessity rather than just. I know a lot of people get into vibe coding through kind of curiosity, just playing around with stuff. And I know we'll come on to that in your case because there's a strong element of that as well. But clearly in this case, it was we've got to get this thing working. And I'm not going to pay a team of engineers to do it. Can't afford to. So let's get Cursor to do it for me, which is really, really interesting. So you're building this startup OnBreeze. Are you still practicing law at that time, or are you more focused on the OnBreeze stuff, or how are you juggling your time?
Well, yeah, I was still practicing law. I'm still technically kind of practicing law. I actually I got a fender bender case 2 weeks ago, and so, but essentially now I'm very much referring things out. What I quickly figured out with OnBreeze is the best marketing tool I had was to get a phone call from a client, use OnBreeze as my intake form, and then I would forward it to different lawyers in my network. And I wouldn't even pitch them on OnBreeze. It was just like, "Hey, are you interested in this client?" They would naturally ask, "Hey, what is this onboarding software you have?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, good question." So at that time, I still was practicing. I wasn't fully into the vibe coding thing, and I would still say, the reason why I decided to keep a law firm in a way is I like helping people, so even if I stopped practicing, my friends of friends would call me with legal questions, or, they had a slip and fall, or they got hurt at work or whatever. And I would still go spend that half hour talking to them and tell them, "Hey, you should talk to this person, whatever." So might as well still get a little paid for it.
It's amazing how many friends come to you with legal questions when you're a lawyer, and they assume that just because you're a lawyer, you can practice across all practice areas, whether it's real estate, I'm buying a house, it's an employment dispute. And it's like, I was a technology lawyer, so very comfortable answering kind of technology law questions, but ask me about real estate. I may as well not be a lawyer at all. I've got literally no idea. And I'll take us on a real quick tangent. You're in Orange County, Mike, aren't you?
Yes, sir. The OC.
So my favorite, I want to say my favorite all-time TV movie lawyer is not Harvey Specter or any of the obvious ones. It's Sandy Cohen from the OC. Did you ever see that? It's probably before your time, Mike. It's showing my age.
No,
but there was a TV show called the OC. Yeah, you were in high school. The TV show called the OC. And he was a lawyer who could do everything. Like, you know, he'd be doing a house sale, and the next week it's a big dispute, an M&A transaction. And so he was my hero and he surfed every morning as well, which I think you do as well, right? And you're into your
Yes,
surfing.
sir. Yeah, if
So,
the waves are good, I'm surfing.
so let's come back from my random tangent of Sandy Cohen, and let's talk about. So you're running this On Breeze product. You're starting to refer work to law firms in your network, and then so how did you get from there, from somebody who used Cursor as a one-time thing to fix a problem? How do you get from there to participating in a global hack? I was going to call it a legal hackathon, but of course this was not legal specific. This was a global hackathon across all industries. How did you get from Cursor into Claude and into that event, which you subsequently won?
Yeah. So Ombreeze, it was a great product. I still think it's a great product. It still works, but it just wasn't taking off. And what's interesting to me is I thought doing my first tech startup, I thought the hard part was going to be building it in the first place. And then I just, like a Field of Dreams thing. If you build it, they will come. That's not the case at all when it comes to tech, legal tech. There's a lot of selling, and it is a very, very fierce market. I remember when I was looking at Google ads, it was $75 to $100 a click, which is what we basically pay for also like fender benders. So it is an incredibly dense market at the moment, but at the same time, there is big payoff in the sense that we are now the second, I don't know if you saw the A16Z thing, the second most spent on AI outside of coders from a legal industry, or the legal industry as a whole. There's still great opportunity there. So at about May or June, it was just like, all right, this thing is not taking off the way I thought it was going to. So at that point, it was like, okay, do I just go back to law full time, or do I have all of a sudden I have all these crazy vibe coding skills is what it now, it's called now. And additionally, Claude Code had come out in February, and I was a very early adopter of that. And that to me was the singular most important technology I've ever played around with. And I played, again, with my VFX background, I played around with a lot of different softwares, and it was just instantly like, this thing is special. It's something different. And so I wasn't ready to give that up. I wanted to keep going and see where this led. So what I was at a family party, and I was talking to one of my good family friends who's a private equity guy, and he was talking about like kind of a complex roll up he was doing at his firm. And the difficulty of having to look up, small, like essentially physical therapies in different markets that like had very specific things they were looking for. And I was like, wait, hold on. AI can do this pretty easily. And so basically that was the first time I did this like kind of outside consulting where someone had a problem. And I was like, okay, hey, let me go build it. 2 weeks later, I bring around the product for them. Their firm loves it. And then so from there on out, I was like, wait, hold on, this is kind of a business model. And I just started talking to people and building different things. Each of those products taught me something new along the way, like data security. I had no idea, even though we did OnBreeze and stuff like that, that has like a very specific way of handling the data. A typical way is you're using this like a database, and it's got this thing called RLS, which is row level security. And it's the standard of what you use in SOC 2. So that that taught me that. A couple months later, my cousin runs a butcher shop in Brooklyn. They don't need like the whole Uber Eats or whatever. They wanted a simple pickup order system. Learn how to do Stripe. And then, coming back around in November, I built this, among other things, I built this thing called Mako, which was my response to all these demand letter generators out there that charge you $700, for 2 demand letters. And because I was looking at it, I was like, wait, Claude Code can do this. And so what I did was I took the Claude Agents SDK and then figured out how to get that on the cloud. Anyways, point being, so I did all these little projects, and each one of those were just things I was interested in learning anyways, that someone had a problem and I went and solved by learning this thing. And just to cap that off, every single one of those lessons turned into when the hackathon came around, it was like, I have an idea that I know is not solvable yet. And so that's kind of where led to what Crossbeam is.
Okay. Well, I'm really looking forward to getting into Crossbeam. A couple of things I just want to pick up on there from what you were saying. So there'll be some people listening to this, and you're talking about, well, I built this thing, and then I use the Agents SDK for this, and they'll be thinking, look, this stuff is way beyond my capabilities, and they'll be thinking, well, Mike said at the start he was in the world of VFX, visual effects, and he sounds like maybe he's a software guy by background. Is that right? Do you think the things that you're able to do are down to you being, what you learned in your previous career? Or do you see this as being a technology, and some of the things that you learned from building. Do you think that others, who maybe don't have that kind of a background can use these tools as well?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of where this new AI comes around. I don't it's way less about the software and more about the ability to critically think. And that's what's going to make lawyers really good at this, in my opinion. The one thing lawyers are lacking that they need to pick up to get good at, and this is what came from my VFX background, as a natural curiosity. As long as you're willing to play with things and debug, essentially, and because you're going to run into errors. And but the crazy thing is, in the past, like, you'd go run into an error and you'd have to go look at like some weird website where someone had figured it out like 10 years ago or something like that, right? All you got to do now is just go ask your AI, hey, this is going on. I got this bug. What do you think? Take a look, and then it'll go fix it or tell you how to do it. So, but it's this software is so different, right? And so the key with prompting, and this is what I think the way I prompt is IRAC, which we all learned in law school: issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. And I often prompt for about 5 minutes straight. The reason why you want to talk instead of type is when you talk, we can average about 180 words a minute. Typing, 60 words per minute is a good typist. And so the key to get really good outputs is very detailed prompts. And so the first 2 lines and your last 2 lines of any prompt are the most important. And in between, that rule and analysis stages, I think, are the most important, though, in the sense that if you explain the why of what we're doing, why we want it to look this way, why we want it to function this way, who are we doing it for, who's the audience, the product that will get outputted is so much better than being like, hey, make me a database for my cases. If that's all you're doing, if you put, excuse my language, but if you put shit in, you're going to get shit out. But if you put good in, you're going to get really good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you make a great point about, you can just ask the AI. And I think it's one of the most overlooked things for people who are saying, well, like, I feel I'm behind. I don't really know where to start. I've never built anything. The fact is, if you can read, you can cook, and if you can go to Claude.ai or ChatGPT, I think it's now chat.com. They bought chat.com, or Gemini, pick your preferred tool and just explain what it is that you're trying to do. And just say, look, explain it to me. I'm not technical. Explain it to me in a way that I will understand, or explain it to me. Explain it to me in a way that my 7-year-old would understand. It will
all
do it
day,
for you,
every day,
step by step. Are there problems that you can't solve with AI? For sure. But, there are problems in out there, technical problems, other things that can't be solved that Claude probably can't help you with. But there's a huge number of things that we can all do just by start with that first prompt. So we'll come back to that at the end. Let's talk about this hackathon then, Mike. And maybe let's start with the punchline, which is that you won. And then then we're going to reverse back to kind of how that all happened. So I'm right in saying that this was not legal specific. This was an international event. How many people applied to participate?
Yeah, 13,000.
13,000 people applied. Okay.
And mostly engineers, people who have been doing this their whole life. It was, I didn't know much about hackathons before, but it's like, from what I've understand now, it was basically the Super Bowl of hackathons.
And who would have thought a lawyer would win? But although, based on what you just said, we are very, very good at prompting and conveying information. So let's tell that story then. So maybe let's start with the idea or the problem you were trying to solve for the app, which was Crossbeam. Tell us more about that. What was that problem you were trying to solve?
Yeah, so everyone knows California has a housing crisis, right? And so the more I looked into it, it turns out the true bottleneck on it, it's not, we have plenty of builders, we have plenty of money, we have desire on both the city sides and the people side and the builder side to build more and solve this housing crisis. So where is the bottleneck? And it's like, the more I talk to people, it turns out it's actually in the permit section of things, which is really interesting because California has a very, very dense regulatory environment when it comes to these permits. And so, but at the same time, it shouldn't take you nine months, 12 months to get a permit for a house, And so the way this idea was sparked, I was talking to my friend Cameron, who, one of my best friends from high school, and he builds ADUs. That's accessory dwelling unit. And it's essentially little cottages you can build in your backyard. It's one of California's policy responses for our housing crisis. And, and the laws are very, very favorable to get these things made in California. But he was saying that it will take them anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get a permit for these types of things. And it's just nonstop back and forth to the cities. And I was like, wait, so what is going on here? And my answer to most things these days is that AI can solve this. So at this point, that was when I had built my legal demand letter, and I'd already tested this Claude basically ingesting 1,500 legal documents, medical documents in a single folder, and it was fine, right? It handles it, it can read it all. And so his blueprints are 30 pages, about around right around there, and I'm like, no problem. So he sends me the blueprint, but it errors out the API or the Claude code. It can't handle it. And I'm like, anytime the AI, even in November when we were on Opus, I believe Opus 4.5 had just come out, which was the top of the model at the time. And I was like, this so rarely happens. It made it really interesting to me. And so when the hackathon came around, like specifically, they were looking for ideas that couldn't be solved with prior models. And I didn't think I was going to get in because they only accepted 500 people into it. And so I was like, well, I got one idea that I know for a fact can't be done. And so submitted, and I got in. And I remember my jaw drop when I got the email saying I was one of the 500 in it. And I was like, oh, shoot. I don't think I'm gonna be able to solve this. And so
And
what
why
it was,
was it just the length of the document that what was it? Yeah, was
yeah.
what was
So
behind
these
the technical
blueprints,
challenge there? Yeah.
yeah. So these blueprints, right? They're essentially a piece of paper the size of a table, right? And so you could fit 8 single PDFs in it. And so not to go too technical, but the way that when you send a PDF in normally, there's this process called OCR. And that basically can use a little bit of computer vision to rip out the words on there. Now, the problem is when you do blueprints, there's lots of little fine print, but if you rip it out away from the actual blueprint of the way the building looks and stuff like that, there's no way to have the context of why it matters, why this little note matters. It's saying that this wall is this thickness to comply with some energy law or whatever. If you take that keynote away, that little piece of text away from what wall it is, it has no meaning. And so there was no traditional way to solve this besides using vision models. And then the problem with the vision models was these pages were way too big for the vision models to handle at the time. And so it was a fun little challenge to try to figure this out going into the hackathon. And I didn't think I was.
Oh, and I think there's actually a takeaway from this already, in my opinion, which is I don't think people spend enough time thinking about the problem. And we'll come on to how you built a solution and the way you architected that, and clearly that played a very important part in you winning. But I also think oftentimes it's finding a big unsolved problem, which is the key. And I think with vibe coding tools, the tendency is to just start from the solution, and just start building something, which is fine, for a bit of fun and a bit of exploration. But I really think we all need to spend more time in the problem space, finding something that's actually worth solving. That got you into the 500, applicants, and from there you were able to build a solution that ultimately won. So I think there's a takeaway there for everybody already. Let's get from there then, Mike. So you've got your problem to solve. It's a pressing problem. What did you do next? Are you doing this kind of like nights and weekends? What tools are you using apart from obviously Claude? Talk us through at a high level the process.
Yes, luckily with Cameron, I was able to get a fair amount of blueprints, and the key was these correction letters from the city. So it was basically I got an answer key. It was historically here's a blueprint that was submitted, and here's the things that are wrong with it according to X city. And so first step for me was figuring out some type of framework to legally analyze these things, which is California's Title 24 is 8,500 pages. Sounds dense, but to AI using, you could basically, it can crush it. So it's kind of wild to me, like we're living in an age where no human being has actually read all 8,500 pages of California's building code, but AI can go do that in about 15 minutes and then figure out what's important, like that. The other benefit was California had a really good 58-page PDF on ADU law. So when you combine those two, we were able to build up a pretty good skill. And so skill with a capital S is a new concept that's come around. And essentially it's another technical term, progressive disclosure way to introduce dense prompts and deep domain knowledge into a model without clogging its context up top. So the problem is if I went and pasted in the entire 58-page ADU handbook into it, my context window, which is limited. At the time, it was 200,000 tokens. Now it's a million, is kind of standard. But so, if I went and did that, I'd be sitting at about 100,000 tokens already used every time I ask it to go do it. And the more context that gets filled up, there's a little bit of a sweet spot. And I always thought of it as about 20 to 50% is where you're going to get your best results. And so if you're starting off already at 50%, you're going to have a lot of confusion by the models. First step was figuring out what the law is in this space and devising it into a simple way. The other thing that I was simultaneously using Claude for was how are we going to ingest this vision stuff? And that's where it's kind of highly technical, but that one connected to my VFX days in the sense that understanding how image compression works and basically slicing it up into manageable chunks with like overlapping layers. So that was kind of like one of the breakthroughs of that. So once I got those two, so the thing starts, I believe, on a Monday. And by Wednesday night, I was like, like I don't have any. I have like two different disparate approaches and I didn't have anything actually working. So basically at that point, I ripped out like a complicated way of like a combo of pulling all the text, trying to reference images. And then I was just like, hey, Claude, here's the rules. Here is a bunch of chunks of pieces of paper. Figure out what it is. And at that point, that was the first run I got successfully to work. And I was hitting about like, I believe I was at like 40% accuracy according to what the city was. But anytime you're vibe coding, if you can get it to run successfully through on these deep agent concepts of long running things, which the initial runs were taking an hour plus, which is really tough when you're under a time crunch. But anyways, anytime you can get it to successfully go at that point, then you could start like using different benchmarking techniques to start raising your accuracy very, very quickly. So that was like, I remember really late on that Wednesday night, I'm 2 days in, and I'm kind of like having a little bit of a freak out. And all of a sudden I got to go and I'm like, all right, we're going to make this work. That was step one right there. And yeah, that was the beginning of it.
Yeah. Were you vibe coding like all day? I mean, this was a time crunch. It was a limited time window. The whole thing was a week, was it? Were you saying?
Yeah, it was a week. Yep.
And so are you waking up in the morning, Claude, you're churning away. Have you got Claude like running through the night? Tell us more about when you were building this thing and how long you spent on it.
Yeah. I mean, so luckily because I have my own firm and, I've got like kind of like a flexible lifestyle, I've dropped everything that week. And I was like, this is the highest leverage thing in my life at the moment. Like, I'm so honored to be in here. And all I wanted to do was just make a cool thing. I figured, how many opportunities in your life you're going to get to go push yourself for a single week and see what you're made of. And so regardless, win or lose, whatever, it didn't matter to me. It was just like, all right, I'm going to give it my all for a week. But I am also in 30 something now. And I am well past the days of staying up for days on end. I can't do that. So, but I actually think that helped me because I think a lot of the people in the contest went crazy during it and stayed up for multiple days. And that you need to be able to critically think. That's just like the absolute thing with these AIs. If you find yourself in a loop just saying, hey, Claude, fix it. Claude, fix it. You didn't fix it. Fix it. It's not going to work. You need to think through these things and you need to provide different perspectives. And so for me...
Just on that, Mike, I just wanted to pick up on that point specifically. Obviously, sometimes I found with Vibecode tools, and I know others do as well, they do run into a problem and you get into this kind of doom loop where you're saying, please fix it. It tries. And at some point it even starts hallucinating and being like, great news, Mike, I fixed it. Here you go. And you look at it and it's like, no, you didn't fix it at all. Stop telling me that you fixed it. What do you do in that situation? How do you get out of those kind of death spirals with the AI?
Okay. So I don't know why this came naturally to me, but understanding the context windows, right? And that there's limits to it and that it's not, the closer you are to filling up your context window, the dumber it's going to get. And so at that moment, especially when it tells you something passed and you look at it and you're like, no, you definitely didn't pass. That's the moment you go spin up another plot. So I call it adversarial prompting in the sense that I'm always using multiples, At the time, I was 4 to 6 different versions of Claude working kind of simultaneously. And then you always using I always think of it as so it's called the Ripper 5 method. Review, innovate, plan, execute, and review. It's 5 steps for every agent's kind of life cycle. And now what I've started to do is the review step and the innovate. Innovate being brainstorm, or sorry, research and innovate. Innovate being brainstorm with Claude, and then I plan with the first agent, and then I go spin up an execution agent that's solely there that looks at the plan and goes and executes it, and then I bring it back to the first agent to review. And that, by splitting the context up into these different tasks with different agents, not a singular thing like that, you're going to get much better results. You should always be using something I picked up, Kat Wu, who's the product manager of Claude Code. That was one of the blessings of the hackathon, is you got to meet these people who are like the next level. I mean, they're the ones making these vibe coding products. And Kat's thing was, you need to have very, very detailed testing strategies. And so I had always treated testing as something I got to do. So I would always be the bottleneck. Kat's point was, Claude now can actually do the test for you if you tell it in detail what you need it to be doing on the test. And that was a massive unlock for my workflow, because it allowed me to move quickly and have Claude run actual real tests on fresh agents. Where you don't want to have the execution agent go run its tests, you want to have a third agent go do the testing regime. That basically, because the execution agent thinks that he did a good job, right? And it's like, when an associate brings you a memo, you don't want you don't want to go and say, hey, did you double check your work? Is it all good? Of course they're going to say, yes, I did. You want to then go give it to someone else and be like, go double check this. That's firing up another agent and running your tests, because that other agent isn't going to be like, we did great.
And sorry to interrupt, just for people who haven't run these tests,
yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about what those are? And I'm also interested in it from the perspective of a friend of mine, Chris Bridges, runs an AI law firm in the UK called Tacit Legal, and he talks about why you won't, at least for now, be able to fully vibe draft legal documents, because the difference between law, the practice of law, and code is you can run tests on code and it either compiles and runs or it doesn't. Whereas with a contract, you can run some tests, like in terms of, are the cross-reference is correct, and are there any typos, and are all the definitions, defined terms used, and all of that. That's fine. But you can't actually run a test for how's this contract going to play out in the real world if there's a dispute in front of this judge on this day. So curious about testing, and maybe start with like how you run tests on the stuff that you're building.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite topics at the moment. So thanks for bringing it up, Matt. And sorry, but even before we go to my test, what I got to bring up is code is deterministic. It either works or it doesn't work. And that is the truth of why vibe coding, why AI, people are saying AI has solved coding, right? And that's why it's solved at first, is because it's the easiest place to test, because it either works or it doesn't work. Now you go give an argument to a judge, right? And you give him the same argument 10 different times, and he may come out with different rulings, right? Law is non-deterministic. I think we, as lawyers, we would desire it to be deterministic in a way. I remember in law school being like, what's the answer, professor? And it isn't. And so that's actually the beauty of with AI. So now to cap that one off, in a sense of what I would recommend to lawyers, yes, like there is no deterministic test that can tell you if your legal drafted document is right or wrong yet. Now, what you can do, though, is you can go spin up 10 different agents with slightly different personalities and ways they think, or that you can tell them you could prompt them to be opposing counsel. Here's my document. Give me your counter arguments to these. And that's the beauty is with AI, is the scale economy you can work with is so cheap that you can go do those types of works. And I would recommend to lawyers. Now, so back to the coding. Anyone out there vibe coding, right? Here's how you got to think of it: as there's back-end tests and then there's front-end tests. Back-end tests are relatively easy. The way you would go about it is, while in your initial planning phases, tell your agent that I need you to be testing the back-end. And to do that, I want a CLI, which is a command line interface, built along with your back-end. And now this is a little technical, but the agent will understand this, because CLIs are probably the best way for Claude or other agents to interact with backend code, because it allows it just to hit it directly and get results. So in the hackathon, for me, my whole backend is a deep research agent. And so the whole thing is actually a CLI underneath the hood that allowed me to have my OpenClaw simultaneously running tests on the hour. So every hour I was having a new ADU thrown through, and then my OpenClaw agent was actually tracking the results. So as we were getting better, I was able to see that. Now, front end testing is a slightly different of a beast because it used to be front end being the UI that you interact with. You got to go click a button, you got to see if it looks right. That was something up until about 3 months ago was very hard for the agent to go do because it could go see the code for what the button looked like, but it would almost like have to make it up. Since the Chrome browser tool, MCP, and Playwright, and these really good web browsing agents tools have come out, it's become a lot better where you can just have your agent go into your launch your site either locally or the real one and go click around and be like, does it all work? I would still recommend for any front end thing that you go take your human eye and just kind of go look at it and just kind of, that then transcribe to your agent, hey, I want this button moved a little bit slightly here. This looks a little scrunched, those types of things. So
Did you, obviously this was a very time limited hackathon, so I suspect there wasn't much time for this, but did you do any testing with users? Like who's the app targeted at in terms of users? And did you try and kind of get it into their hands? And the reason I ask is I've found we're at this moment where anyone can build stuff, but the person building it, sometimes they're the user. So sometimes you're building stuff for yourself, but sometimes you're actually making something for other people. And we used to have a UX designer at Loople, and her kind of catchphrase was, "You are not your users." And so you have to understand the user, what they want, the kind of terminology they use, and their journey, and what they're going to get stuck on. And I learned a lot from that because I found that things that were perhaps obvious to me, like it's clear to me that if I want to achieve this thing, I got to click this button. You put it in front of a user and they're like, I have no idea how to do that thing. And that's simply because, I designed it for myself, rather than design it for users. So I guess in this example, you probably didn't have a huge amount of time for testing, but I'm curious about your take on that and the role of user testing as well as the more technical testing.
Yeah, it's going to back to your point. It's the most important part, especially in areas you don't know. And I even for the things that I feel like I have deep domain knowledge on, like I built my demand letter software, and I give it over to a law firm, like, hey, test this out. And then there was a couple buttons where exactly what you said, right? Where it's just like, I thought it was obvious, they couldn't find it. And so those things really bring to the surface what you need to be thinking about. And so you can't just work in a bubble unless it's your own thing, which is also really fun and powerful. Now for Crossbeam, this is so remember on Wednesday night, that was the first run I got it to go through. And then by midday Thursday, I was sitting at about I got it up to like 60, 70% accuracy. So according to what the city was. And then so I sent it over to my buddy Cameron, who's a builder himself, the results. And I was just like, okay, I'm a little nervous. Like, what's he going to think? And he's like, dude, this is like, he loved it. And then and the other thing you got to be aware of is like your friends, when they see these things, they're going to be like just stoked for you that you're doing something, right? So, but the moment I was like, I'm on to something was when he sent me like 3 more blueprints that didn't have corrections letters yet. He's like, hey, can you run these through the system so I can go have my designers fix them? And so that was like on that Thursday. And I was like, okay, we got something here. Like, this is cool. And then going with that, I had one more important conversation during the hackathon. One of my best friends from law school is the mayor of Buena Park, Connor Trout. Great guy, great, like truly cares about his community. And so I wanted his opinion kind of as like a city side of this thing. So what happened was, to gauge the accuracy of the corrections letters, I started realizing, it was a little bit quicker to have Claude go write a corrections letter itself. Wanted to hear, I wasn't really thinking about it from the city perspective. And then talking to Connor, it was like, wait, hold on. They need a lot of help reviewing these things. Not only is it just for builders to make better corrections letters, we can also do the flip side of the platform, which is have the city review it quicker. Hopefully we're helping have builders submit better permits, and then the city can get back to the builder faster saying you're approved or need to fix these couple items. And so that by talking to 2 separate users, completely changed the product. It validated it. And I think that's part of the reason why I won the hackathon was just, that time crunch was actually the thing that forced me to be like, hey, I need to hear from people because I can't just make this up in my head. And it created a whole different product. And so I would recommend anyone doing this, if you're vibe coding something that's not just for you, go find users, talk to them, have them use it, take their feedback. You don't even have to take I go talk to them and I get granola transcripts, and that's what I'm plugging into Claude. And I'm like, Claude, hey, what do you think Cameron really needs right here? and it's so much more powerful.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'm making notes here, but I think some of the things already you've surfaced are find a problem worth solving. Listen to people who are experiencing that problem. Get your proposed solution in front of them. Um, do research and discovery. Take what you learn, feed it back into the system, iterate it, and improve it, and then test it to make sure it works. Don't just kind of say, "Okay, that looks nice. I love the purple gradient color scheme. Um, fantastic." Test it or have the AI test it and make sure it works on web, make sure it works on mobile. I think one of the most common things I see people screw up when they're vibe coding is they don't build it mobile responsive. And obviously the vast majority of people access the internet through a mobile device, whether we like it or not. And, you'll see people announce these apps and you open it on your phone and it looks like a minestrone soup. All the buttons are overlapping each other. And that's one prompt to say, and also please make sure it's mobile responsive, but you can design a test for that. So, I think already we've surfaced some absolute gold here. Let's talk about the story of you actually winning then. So tell us about that moment. So you'd had these user discussions, you'd built the thing, you'd had kind of like your technical breakthrough, your eureka moment where the thing was actually working. And then presumably you had to submit it. And then there was a period of time and then they announced the winners.
Yeah. So it was pretty crazy. It was, so you submit on Monday at like noon or whatever. And, they're supposed to do the announcement. They're doing like a live judging thing for the top. They're going to announce the top 6 and do a live judging. That's supposed to be on Wednesday. And then they say, hey, it's taking us so long, like we have to push it back a day. And, I had no expectation. Like I had already seen some videos that people were putting in the Discord and I'm like, oh yeah, that's better than mine. That one's better. That one's amazing. Wow. That guy's going to cure cancer. Like things like that. And so, they go on Thursday and then first thing on the video, they announce the top 6. I'm like, whoa, they, Crossbeam's in there. I'm like, wow. And then, I think, they go through and then so Boris Cherny, who's the head of, he's literally created Cloud Code. It's just, this guy is a full genius. He is a fascinating human. And, he's one of the judges. And so one of the things he said, they play my video and then they start talking about my project. And he's like, what I love about it is exactly the way we make Cloud Code is we just go listen to users. We go talk to them. What do they want us to build? And go find these things. And I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, I guess I got a good shot. But at the same time, I'm like, out of the 6, I'm like, all 5 are still better. And then, they go announce, I'm like, maybe I can get 3rd. And then they go 3rd and I'm like, okay, so I didn't get that one. And then they do the 2nd and I'm like, definitely whatever, but I'm just like, all right, I made top 6. So cool. And then they announced that Crossbeam won and it was just draw on the floor. It was truly at that moment, I was like, I didn't know what it really meant, but I was just like, wow, like this is insane. Like the people I was up against and just genuinely everyone was so good. The projects were amazing. The levels to the engineering game are incredible. And I was just so honored to be there and to win it was wild. And then they had fly me out to San Francisco for the Cloud Code birthday party. And it just became this whirlwind of meeting people, speaking at that event, a lot of different VC meetings. And then just so much good outreach from across, like literally I've talked to people in different countries too about this permit thing. I'm like, sorry guys, I'm focused on California and then maybe, we'll expand to some other states. Like I need to get more housing around me so I can afford a place. And, but so yeah, just absolutely crazy rocket shit of a ride. And then now here I am here in San Francisco again, and I'm doing a 30-minute keynote on day 2 of the Cloud Developer Conference.
Incredible. Well, that leads us nicely, I suppose, to what's next. So you won the thing. Are you all in on this product on Crossbeam? Is this a startup? Are you looking for VC money? What's the plan with Crossbeam? Or are you building other things? What's your focus right now?
Yeah, so I would say I'm full time working on Crossbeam. At the same time, I still, like I said earlier, I picked up a fender bender case 2 weeks ago. Now I referred it to one of my favorite law firms. They do an excellent job. So I'm still helping people in that sense of things. I'm definitely kind of like not fully active in the legal area, but I still love it. And then I still do some side projects. But now, so for Crossbeam, I'm very excited that luckily my buddy is the mayor of Buena Park. And so it became my first client. And so we are doing that behind the scenes. It's not official at the moment, where we're having, hopefully we'll go to city council vote in the next month or 2. and be able to get a public, like, I want people to be able to drag and drop their blueprint straight into Crossbeam, get a pre-check review, and then through after they go fix it, they can then go submit to the city. That to me is the next step with Buena Park. And there's a couple other cities coming down the pipeline I'm excited to get officially going and then announce. So we're doing a small marketing campaign straight to builders, and then through word of mouth through my buddy Cameron. That side has been very productive. So essentially I'm bootstrapping it, but at the same time, I am open to the VC funding. I've had various different discussions. There's one firm out here in San Francisco that I've grown pretty close with. So we'll see where that goes. But I've never been like, oh, I need a big check to justify doing this. To me, it's always just been, I want to solve a problem. I'm going to be doing it regardless. And that problem right now is the permit crisis. So I think we could take a big chunk at it.
Yeah, incredible progress. And yeah, even since the hackathon, by the sounds of things, the progress you've made with the different cities and municipalities, super impressive how far it's already come. And I'm not surprised you're getting some inbound VC interest. I guess I wanted to just kind of wrap with a couple of things around just vibe coding in general. And we're sitting here right now in early May 2026. And right now, both LinkedIn and X are alight with the story of something called Mike OSS. No relation to Mike Brown, I think. Mike OSS is for those who haven't seen it, a gentleman called Will Chen has built what he calls an open source version of some of the legal AI tools. And it's provoked what I think is some very interesting debate, but also quite polarized, I've noticed, into there are those who are saying vibe coding is a joke, it's a waste of time, you shouldn't even bother doing it, you shouldn't build anything in this way, go take a computer science degree and come back when you've got one of those. They're kind of like one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are those who are going, well, Harvey's dead, Lagora's dead, who needs to be a software engineer anymore, because you can just vibe code anything, and it only takes me a weekend and I'll go vibe code Salesforce or HubSpot, or let's not stop there, I'm going to vibe code Microsoft 365. And I'm curious as to where you are on that spectrum. You're an incredibly advanced vibe coder, the world's leading vibe coder, you can make the case for with your win. Where do you stand on that debate?
Yeah, it was fascinating seeing the polarized takes on this. The one I saw last night that I was kind of amazed by was someone did a deep security analysis of the Mike OSS. And I was like, wait, hold on. If you're going to spend this long writing up in a LinkedIn post for this, you could just take this post, give it to Claude, and it could go fix the security issues that it found. So I downloaded that, or I cloned it down from GitHub on Monday, and I actually used Mike OSS myself to redline a contract that I'm in negotiations with someone for. And I found it very powerful and very good. Now, the main benefit, when I saw it, there was a couple of security issues, but to me, you pull it down, first things that it wanted me to do was save things to Supabase and R2, which is Cloudflare's kind of storage bucket. And I was like, I don't need to do that. So I just had Claude go and make it all local based for me. So then the only thing that's going to the cloud is via my Anthropic key, which this is very easy, folks. It's when you're working via API key, it's a single setting. You just say, do not use my data for training purposes. So now I'm fully secure on this. My stuff stays on my thing. Now, so the main thing is don't think of what Will made as a finished product. It's just, here is kind of like some clay thing molded into something that is semi-useful. Now go mold it yourself to what you really want. I had a blast redlining this thing. Honestly, the redline, who has fun redlining, right? And all of a sudden I was just like, I was having so much fun redlining it because I was going over to Claude and like, hey, I want to be able to screenshot and paste it into the command line because that's the way I work in Cursor. Claude goes and does that 2 seconds later. I didn't like how, the Mike OSS would make red lines, and I knew it was doing it via code, but I wasn't seeing in the viewer. So then I told Claude, hey, I want to see with the actual red lines, update the viewer so I can see it. Then there was something I wanted to be able to see both viewer points at both times. So then I could get a little stack deck of the original versus the differential thing. And so I just made another viewer like that. He is like, all right, guys, like this guy went out there and he, in 2 weeks he pumped together. It's not perfect. It's not like the game changer, but what the game changer is that we can go do these things and you can go personalize these tools for your exact workflow. If you are subjecting yourself to a vendor lock-in. You are just basically saying, I'm going to go learn this new software and be here for the next 2, 3 years. Now, there is a time and place for that. And I would recommend that for like, I actually have vibe coded a Salesforce version. This is my early days, but what you quickly learn, okay, the reason it's like hiring a lawyer a lot of times. You can go do it yourself. You can represent yourself, but the lawyer has the malpractice, the ability to kind of like be like, hey, there is, if he gave me terrible advice, I have like a way to go through insurance, go get it. Same with Salesforce stores of record, databases. Like there's a lot of things that, yeah, I can go vibe code it myself, but I want their assurances and like kind of their quality support. Also, you don't want to wake up on a Saturday, 2 a.m. and have something down and your firm needs it back up. If you're vibe coding that essential piece, that's where I'm going to go pay someone to go do that. Like, if the things crashed. So
And
there's a time and place for those.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's an
go ahead.
interesting point. And obviously, your vibe coding journey started because you couldn't depend on your engineering team, and they kind of let you down, or they wanted to charge you more to do a thing.
Yep.
But is there a line where you get funding, let's say for Crossbeam or whatever your next project is? Are you hiring an engineering team, or am I looking at the engineering team? Where's the line where you reach out and you think, okay, I'm going to bring in an engineer for this? Is there
Yeah.
anything you can't solve through vibes alone, let's say?
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't run into it yet. But that may just be my personality. It's like you give me a problem and I'm kind of like a bulldog where I can't stop thinking about it until I go solve it. Now, yeah, in the initial discussions with the VCs, they're going to be a lot more comfortable with it if I go team up with an engineer. So, but I have a certain way I like to work, and I work at a speed that is unheard of as of a couple, in the last year or whatever. And so that, I'm looking for certain types of people. Well, at the same time, I've gotten Claude pretty good at the ops portion of keeping my products, because I got a fair amount of products that people have paid for that they pay me monthly retainers to make sure they're live. And so I have a system for that. The area where Crossbeam's going to need a lot of help now is in the sense that if we go expand to different states. So a cool thing going back to, this is my plug right here, is I'm going to be announcing this on Thursday, is I'm going to open source every single simple permit in California into skills into a Claude Cowork plugin. Now, that taught me a lot during that process of scraping California's not only the state code, Title 24, but also looking for the differences in the municipal code so I can get every city of the 483 in. So it equates to 10,626 skills in a single plugin. Granted, now users, the cities who hopefully use it, they'll get to use it for free as long as they're using Cowork. We'll be able to download it per city, and then hopefully it won't be that far for them to then automate it. Now, as I was doing the scrape, granted, it only costs $6,000 to scrape the entire state, which is kind of astounding that there's so much law in the US, in the world, right? But for $6,000, I could basically do the most regulatory dense state. So in theory, that should be $294,000 for the rest of the nation to go scrape it. Now, but at the same time, there is a lot of complexities to each state. And so that's where I would want engineers' help, because that was it's been a slog this month getting this done. So
Yeah. Well, and thanks for announcing your open source initiative before Boris Cherney and co at Anthropic get to hear about it. I think that's we'll take that as a without limitation exclusive.
Yep.
Last couple of things for you, Mike, and then we'll wrap up. What about law schools? Is this something that this stuff that you've been talking about? There'll be people who are familiar with it. There'll be people who are like, my mind's just been blown. I understood it only 25% of what Mike was talking about. What should law schools be doing here? Should we be teaching vibe coding, or is it just something that, people can kind of self-teach? How do you see that?
Yeah. This is becoming a topic I'm passionate about, because when I went to Chapman Law School, I loved the place. I had great professors. But when I left law school, I really had I didn't know what I was going to do. And nothing against my professors. They were like, you need to figure something out. But I was kind of lost. And so to me, this is for a lot of people like me in law school. There's a lot of people who are, not to pat myself on the back, but everyone in law school is bright, right? Everyone, they took a hard test to get in, and then to go past the bar, you gotta have some good chops. And so this, I think, for people out there, if you're in law school and you kind of hear some of yourself in what I'm talking about, Go dedicate yourself for the next month and just go try to make AI do everything for you. And I think you might find a really, really cool path. Law school, what I was talking about earlier, the IRAC method, what they teach you to write essays for. It's so funny because they're only teaching you that for the bar. Turns out it's actually, in my opinion, the best way to prompt. Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. You are getting trained for 3 years to become great prompters. You could either look at it as, all right, hey, they're doing this weird essay method to get me through the bar, or you can now look at it the way I see it in retrospect. It's like, man, these guys taught me to become a really, really good critical thinker and prompter in consequence. And so I think that lawyers could be really, really good at this as long as they stay curious and don't run into one bad AI prompt and just be like, oh, well, not for me. Now, from a teaching angle, I fully agree. It's going to be hard to get it in schools because I don't see how it fits into the curriculum to go past the bar. But at the same time, I'm talking with Anthropic about starting to do, going to law schools and doing a little vibe coding course and then maybe a quick 1-day hackathon type thing. So if anyone is listening to this from law schools, come hit me up in discussions with Anthropic about doing this. We'd love to come sponsor these things.
That would be incredible. Yeah, I'm so with you, by the way, Mike, on hackathons, just because in my mind, a hackathon is basically 3 things. It's find a problem worth solving, work with technology and other human beings to solve the problem, and then present your solution convincingly to the world. And actually, there isn't a career on the planet that doesn't involve that 3-step process. And there's so much uncertainty in the world right now about none of us know what the world's going to look like in 10 years. But if we did more hackathons in education, and I don't just mean Claude Code hackathons, you can have a hackathon when a kid is 10 years old and they've got to go design a board game or something like that. Doesn't even need to involve technology, but teach them to find a problem worth solving, work with other humans to solve the problem and present your solution to the world. I think you can, whether you're trying to solve climate change or you're trying to build a Vibecoder app, that is the framework right there. And I think we should bring it to the center of education. We're going to run out of time, but I guess my last question is, I think, Mike, there'll be people listening to this who have just got tons of ideas, whether it's hackathons, whether it's law schools, whether it's wanting to pick your brains on things. Probably several people are going to ask, how do I get tickets to the Anthropic event in California or London or Tokyo? You'll get a few of those. But how do people contact you? How can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm active on LinkedIn nowadays. Yeah, Matt, you'll probably post it with mine. So I go, I have the second most common name on earth, is my understanding. I go by Mike Brown, but my LinkedIn is Michael T. Brown. And you'll see now I have as my description, Claude Hackathon winner. So I'd love for you guys to find me there. I'm also active on X, but I can't, not so active. I follow things. That's where I get a lot of my news. So I think that if you really want to understand what's the cutting edge in the AI space, I find it on X. I love the thought-provoking discussions of LinkedIn, though. So
fantastic. Well, I mean, what an incredible story already, and an interesting journey that you've been on, from the VFX stuff into law school, and then this vibe coding thing, and just a huge congratulations. I don't think I said congratulations at any point, but big congratulations for winning, representing the legal community as the world's #1 vibe coder. Maybe that should be in your LinkedIn profile. But just awesome stuff. And I suppose the other place people should look for you, Mike, would be on GitHub. I assume you've probably got various repos up there that people can find. So I'll put those in the show notes as well.
Awesome, man.
But for now, just a huge thank you. Thanks for your time. I learned a lot, and I'm sure those listening have learned a lot as well. And can't wait to see what you build next.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was an honor to be on this program. Thank you.
Thanks again.